free to move a little bit if that's easier to see, to hear. I apologize for the confusion. I know many of you are here because it was hard to tell from the digest whether this week was the flower festival ceremonies or next week. So those ceremonies will be happening next week. And this week I'm going to be talking about those ceremonies and talking about the legends and mythology that are behind the flower festival or the celebration of the birth of Shakyamuni Buddha. My plan next week, if the weather holds, is that we'll actually have that outside, so that we'll do that ritual outside, so that everyone who comes can be together there outside. And if it's pouring down rain, then we'll do something else. But we're kind of playing that by ear a little bit. So this morning I'd like to talk about myth, about the myth of Shakyamuni Buddha's birth. And as I always emphasize, when I say myth, I don't mean something that was just made up. I mean something much richer than something that was just made up. To me, myth is a very positive word. It is an invitation to something deep and profound. Myth and ritual in our tradition are held hand in hand, really in all traditions. A myth without a ritual just becomes a kind of fantasy. And a ritual without a myth just becomes a kind of, maybe the word, a performative act. Myth and ritual, practicing with them hand in hand, is so that we can take care of a deep importance, a deep significance, a deep meaning of living, so that it doesn't become abstracted. Let me explain that a little bit. Sometimes, if we emphasize myth without ritual, we can come up with all kinds of meanings from the mythology or from the teaching. And we can apply those to our understanding or to our life, and that has some benefit. But there's a tendency for it to become very abstract. Right? Meaning becomes some kind of description or explanation that I could give about something, rather than the lived experience of this life. So the word meaning is a little bit tricky. That's why I oftentimes use the word significance, or I like the word importance, or kind of a more archaic word, import, that there is a deep import to our living, which is not abstract. And mythology and ritual are an invitation into this in a very important, profound, and ancient way. Maybe the most fundamental way that humans have been invited into this up until the modern period. And then we start getting like fantasy novels and sci-fi TV shows and all kinds of different things that also use some of these same parts of our being, but mostly for entertainment, maybe to explore some important ideas, but again becomes very abstract. So next week we'll practice this ritual of bathing the baby Buddha's body. Those of you who have experienced that before, you'll have this image in your head of a large bowl filled with water with a small statue of the baby Buddha. He's very plump and pudgy, very babyish. Chozen Beis Roshi fashioned this Buddha some time ago, and Tenkan got that from the monastery and brought maybe 20 years ago, 15 years ago, something like that. And she started to make these because the ones that were available from Asia were she said they just look like little men. And they kind of do. But so she's like, I really want one that's like a baby. She is a pediatrician for many, many years and deep connection to children. And so she started to make these Buddhas. So we have this statue of the baby Buddha, and with the water and decorated with flowers. And then the whole assembly comes forward and ladles this pure water over the head of the baby Buddha and washes the baby Buddha. That's the core of the ritual. There's some other things that happen, but that's the core of it. Very simple. Right? So we will enact that ritual next week, but that ritual has meaning. That ritual can invite us to meaning or to significance or to import because it is connected to myth. It is an expression of myth. That there is a symbol and there's a story. There are symbols and story. And in the same way that myth and ritual work hand in hand, symbol and story work hand in hand. Right? So that this significance is not abstracted. That it is something about a non-abstracted mind and heart. Not just saying, oh, this is what it means, this is the sign that we've placed upon it. But encountering through our own heart, our own mind, the significance, the import, the meaning. Now, this way of speaking is important because usually when we're speaking about things, we're speaking about what it is that we see. We're not speaking about how it is that we see. Notice the difference there. Normally when we're speaking about what it is that we see. Okay, what are the phenomena? Whether those are physical phenomena, or they're mental or emotional phenomena, whatever they are, we're speaking about those things. Right? And that's important that we are able to do that. But how do we work with how it is that we see? Okay? So this way of encountering teachings is asking us to pay attention to what is the frame, what is the framing of the world, what is the framework with which we see the world. Once we turn and we try to look at the framework directly, it becomes an object of our seeing. It's no longer, we're talking about what it is that we're seeing, rather than talking about how it is that we see. As soon as we turn to it and we talk about it, then it becomes this kind of object. There's a common way we say that people have different lenses, right? That's a common image that we use. We'd say you have a lens, and the lens that you have, the lens that you're looking through, determines the way in which you'll see the world. It doesn't have to mean that you're making everything up, but it means the world is colored by the way that you look through the lens. Does that image, so people are familiar with that, right? So you have a cultural lens, or you have a lens of your, whatever the particular causes and conditions of your life are. Now, when we use that term, we usually think the lens is like lenses in the glasses, right? And we could if we could take the lenses off, then we would see things how they actually are. What I want to say here is those aren't lenses of glasses. Those are the lenses of your eyes. They are the pupil itself. If you take them off, there is no seeing, right? The seeing itself requires a lens. Before you put a lens here over your eye, if you need some correction for your seeing, you have a lens in your eye. That's what seeing is. And so it's important for us to not just think about how do I get rid of my lens, but how do I encounter through this lens in a way that isn't just coloring things from my particular attitude, my particular way of seeing the world and kind of projecting it out there. This is something which traditions can invite us to, and indeed they do. Religious traditions work with these lenses, and they work with them in many, many different ways. There are many styles of the way in which religious traditions or non-religious traditions ask us to work with these lenses. Some styles are very dogmatic. They say, this is the meaning of this mythology, and this is the way that we're going to enact it, and anybody who thinks differently is going to hell or whatever, however it is that the dogma's got that set up. And the way they work with it is to try to instill a particular vision, right? And to adhere to that particular way of seeing is to see things in a particular way, and that's where salvation comes. Now, this is not the way of Buddhism, and I would say it's particularly not the way of Zen Buddhism. which this temple is part of Zen school. There's no proper or correct interpretation for Zen Buddhists of mythology. Zen is really fearless in this working with, in the aliveness of seeing. The aliveness of seeing is the meaning, it is the import, it is the significance. And so Zen Buddhism is famous for taking these different kinds of legends and messing with them in some way. So we have many iconoclastic figures within the ancestors of Zen Buddhism. How many people have seen the book Zen Flesh, Zen Bone? It was okay. It's just a very popular book, like Origins of Zen in the West or whatever. A lot of, Paul Reps, I think, is the name of the translator. Many stories from, and if you read that, it's just full of these iconoclastic stories. You know the famous saying, if you see Buddha on the road, kill him. Have people heard that before? See Buddha on the road, kill him. Right? There's a famous story of one of our ancestors that took the Buddha from the altar and cut it into firewood and kept himself warm. Wanshi, Wanshi Zenji, who was a kind of like a grand uncle of Dogen Zenji, the founder of this school in Japan, is very critical of Yunmen, one of our ancestors, who said, if I saw the baby Buddha, I would surely kill him and feed him to the dogs. I love that stuff, you know. Because I'm iconic, I have this sort of yearning for that iconoclasm. I'm taking this Buddha, this whatever, and putting it up on the altar, you know, bowing to it, offering incense, you know. Isn't this just fixing an idea of awakening? And so within Zen Buddhism, there's that kind of energy. It's there to unhook us from our stuck view. We're looking at things, we think they are a certain way because we saw them that way, and there's a lot of teaching within Zen Buddhism that's trying to knock us off of that way of seeing, especially when it comes to experiences we may have of awakening, or some insights that we might have about the deep significance and import of life. There's a funny image that gets brought up in the koan cases sometimes about notching the edge of a boat. Sometimes a teacher will say, oh, so-and-so, they're notching the edge of a boat. And what that's a reference to is being out on a boat on a lake and then seeing something down deep in the water, which would be like an image of insight, and putting a notch on the side of the boat to mark where it is, what you saw, right? You know. So there's all kinds of energy within Zen Buddhism to try to say, oh, come on, don't put a notch in the side of the boat. Don't make an image. Don't set up something in the place of the actuality of the aliveness, the deep import of living. But an overemphasis on that can ignore looking at self. It can sound like a kind of nihilistic or nihilistic approach, right? Just get rid of all the images, you'll be able to see. If you could just take your glasses off, you'd be able to see the way that it actually is, which I can guarantee you would be very boring. Maybe boring's okay. So even the breaking of views, even the unhooking of fixed views relies on seeing. It relies on the constant flow of images that come through our being. I'm not just talking about physical seeing here, right? I'm talking about the seeing that is our consciousness, that's moving through our heart and mind all the time. The symbols and stories are deeply important to work with. They're not to be put aside. And as I was preparing for this talk today, I planned to talk a lot about the legend, which I'll get to here, don't worry. But there's a big setup. But what I was feeling is, it's your spiritual work to have an insight, to have an intuition, to have a deep relationship with the legend, with the mythology, with the seeing that comes through receiving those stories and enacting the ritual that goes along with them. In fact, I rob something from you if I explain it. If I explain it, I might give you something, but I also take something away. I take away your own seeing. You say, oh, Ejo said is this, right? And so now that becomes the image. And that can be helpful in some places. Like I described this notching the side of a boat, and you could get it, and you could say, oh, that's funny. And now that will stay with you. That will be your own. But you will have to find your own way of seeing into what is the foolishness and also beauty of notching the side of a boat. And you might come to say something like, what is not notching the side of a boat? My whole life is nothing but notches in the side of a boat. What a wonderful boat I've carved through this notching. And could you tell what is the distance between the notch and what it is that I saw in the water? Nothing. Right? So you could play with it, right? Now it becomes an image which can become your own framework, right? It's playing with the way you see the world, not just what you see. Now, in Zen phrasing, we would say, there's no need to be a slurper of dregs. Okay? That's an ancient, like the dreg slurpers. There's a famous koan about the dregs. Is that what you call like the bottom of a barrel? Like, yeah, the dreg slurpers. And to be a dreg slurper is just to just eat the kind of leftover stuff that's already been processed, right? It's kind of the fallout from whatever the processing was. But to be our own person in a kind of way these days, one of the reasons we're afraid of mythology is because the dogmatic handling of mythology has set us in a way of approaching mythology to think, oh, wait a minute, they're going to tell me how I have to think, right? Like a mythology is going to be like a pressing down on me. It's going to be an oppressive force rather than an inviting force or a liberating force. But I like to invite you to that side that's liberating. There is no set way to understand what it means for the Buddha to be born. That doesn't mean we just make whatever we want up, because it's just fun to have a little makeup session, right? You can do that, it doesn't matter, but you have to engage it. Know that it's about meaning, know it's about importance, and through that, then the tradition comes alive. So, this legend of the Buddha's birth, why do we even talk about it? I mean, isn't it enough to just know, okay, Shakyamuni Buddha must have been a baby at once, right? He's lived in India 2,500 years ago. Our experience, generally speaking, is that humans we've known were babies at once. They were born, right? So we could just leave it there. But because the Buddha was not just any person, the Buddha was an awakened person. That's what Buddha means, the awakened one. We pay special attention to what was his birth. And there's a lot wrapped up in that. Right? Of course, we're not just talking about the physical birth of the Buddha. We're talking about the birth of awakening. We're talking something about renewal. Why do we celebrate this in the spring? Because the legend tells us that's when he was born. Why does the legend tell us that that's when he was born? Is it because someone wrote down in a calendar and we know for sure? Of course not. They didn't even have the calendar we have right now. We could make some guesses about the third lunar month on the 8th day. Some of the records say that, but they're only from about 1,200 or 1,500 years ago. They're not 2,500 years old. I mean, you've played the game of telephone, right? How many people does it take to mess up a word like peanut butter? Yeah, it takes one person. I can't even remember what I said a minute ago, So, no, the legend doesn't say that because that's when he was born in some historically verifiable sense. But, have you noticed the flowers? Of course you have. Have you noticed some upswell in your being because of the season? Because of the shift this particular year? Vaccinations, right? A shift in society. But that's happening every year. Actually, it's happening all the time. So the legend's about that. The legend's about what you're seeing, but it's also about how you're seeing. so that it's everywhere. The way that you see is always present with the seeing. So the legend asks us to consider, what of these flowers? Legend tells us that the Buddha's mother's name was Mahamaya, and his father's name was Suddhodana. Suddhodana was the king of his particular section of the Shakya clan, which was a large group in northern India. And oftentimes he'll be referred to as a king in the translations that we read, and that he received a bride, Mahamaya, from Devadaha, which was within the same tribe. They lived in Kapilavastu, and when she was she had become pregnant, and when it was getting close to her time of birth, she asked the king if she could return to her parents' home, which is very common in many cultures, in particularly Asian cultures, to have the baby, and he said yes. And it was on that travel between her new home, living there in Kapilavastu, to the home of her birth, where the Buddha was born. Even previous to this part of the story of the birth is the story of how the Buddha came to become the baby of Mahamaya. Legend tells us that, and there are many versions of these legends, so depending on what you're reading, you will have a different information. But that's also what's wonderful about mythology, is it doesn't get stuck in one track, one way that it's said every time. It has different approaches. So many of the legends tell us that when Mahamaya was sleeping one evening, she entered into a deep dream, and she traveled to the Tushita heaven, which is one of the highest heavens in the Buddhist cosmology. It's the heaven of total contentment. And this was the place where the Buddha Shakyamuni had taken a rebirth after countless lifetimes as a bodhisattva. So for countless lifetimes, who we know as the Buddha Shakyamuni had been living in many, many, many different forms. And we have a whole bunch of stories that are called the Jataka tales about all of these previous lives. And so the life just before his incarnation here, he was incarnated in this Tushita heaven. And it said that Mahamaya went to this heaven in her dream, and she was bathed by celestial beings, and she lay there at the foot of a massive silver mountain, and this massive white elephant came over the golden and silver mountains and came to her and entered her side. And when she awoke the next morning, she was with child. Now, I want to make a point here. In Buddhism, there is not a big emphasis on Mahamaya's virginity. Some people hear that and they're like, oh, okay, here we go again, which is a very valid reaction, right? But in Buddhism, there is no, in fact, the interpretation of how the Buddha would enter into Mahamaya, probably the physicality of the Buddha's being would have definitely come through sexual intercourse with the king. There's no denying of Suddhodana's fatherhood of the Buddha. But in the Buddhist understanding, all of us are transmigrating from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. And so the combination of our biological parents coming together also creates the opportunity for a part of our mind essence to flow on in the world. And so the teaching here about the white elephant is not let's stay away from our physicality or our sexuality reference. It's saying that the Buddha, the traditional way of understanding would be that the Buddha could choose his birth because he was so highly advanced for many, many lifetimes of serving consciousness, of serving all beings to help them overcome suffering, that he could decide that this would be the best place, and that he had chosen Mahamaya, and he had chosen Suddhodana, and he had chosen Kapilavastu, he had chosen northern India, he had chosen 2,500 years ago, he had chosen that time and place to be born. And so, as Mahamaya is traveling with her large entourage from Kapilavastu to Devadaha, she comes through a park that's called Lumbini Park. And you hear this if you read things about the Buddha's life, or if you like Buddhist artwork. That's a very common motif. And in Lumbini Park, there was said to be a beautiful, clear water with many flowers blooming in it, and that the people from the Shakya tribe like to go there to bathe and to relax and to find kind of a peacefulness within the beauty of the natural world. And so it said as they came by Lumbini Park, Mahamaya said, let's stop here for a bit. And so they stopped, and she went into the water, and she was bathing, swimming, refreshing herself. And as she came out of the water, there's a beautiful grove of sala trees, which have a beautiful fragrant flower. And she reached up and grabbed the branch of the sala tree, and the Buddha was born there while she was standing. I've been to 3 childbirths. The one that went the easiest was standing, kind of standing. I'm not sure, a lot of you have more experience than me in that. But the Buddha was born, and it said that after the Buddha was born, that he immediately stood up and without assistance stepped 7 steps in each direction. Many of the legends say that in the 10 directions, which is kind of interesting because the 10 directions are the cardinal points and then the ones in between. So north, south, east, west, northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest, and up and down. So I kind of get the image of the 8 directions, but when it goes to 10 directions, stepping up into the air or stepping down into the earth, that gets a little bit more fuzzy for me in terms of the images. But that's a beautiful thing about myth. You don't have to get stuck on it too much, right? 7 steps in the 10 directions and returned back to the center. Different legends say different things, but this is the one that I prefer. He came back to the center. He pointed to the heavens with his right hand and to the earth with his left, and he said, above and below the heavens, I alone am the honored one. Plucky little cuss. Above and below the heavens, I alone am the honored one. And it said that at that point 2 Nagas appeared. 2 Nagas, they're dragons. 2 dragons appeared, and they both put forth a flow of water. One was warm and one was cold, and this is what bathed the body of the Buddha. Now, a couple things in this, just connections with things that you might pay attention to, is this question of 7 steps is always important. Why 7? Do you notice 7s are just showing up all over the place in all kinds of spiritual writing? Yeah. So 7 is important, is a kind of very important number, and in many, not only Asian traditions, but in many traditions, the 7th is like the completion of the mystery. Not completion that the mystery is set down, but the completion in the sense that the mystery is totally, you're invited to the mystery. It's a kind of ungraspable number. It's a symbolic number of going beyond. In the case of Buddhist teaching, many people think of this 7 steps as being related to the 6 worlds. So in traditional Buddhist way of thinking, there are 6 different realms that we can take rebirth in. One is the human realm, one's the divine realm, one's the realm of the angry gods or the Asuras, one's the animal realm, one's the realm of hungry ghosts, and one is the hell realm. So one of the ways that people think about the 7 steps is the Buddha was walking beyond those, saying we don't have to be trapped by those 7 things. Sometimes people think of the 7 as being going beyond the 6 sense graspings. Right? Eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Those are the 6 senses in Buddhism. So that he didn't just jump over 6 to get to 7, right? But he walked. Yes, yeah, there's eyes. Yeah, there's ears. Yeah, there's nose. No, now there's tongue. Yeah, there's body. Yeah, there's mind. 7 steps. Right? Yeah, there's hell. Yeah, there's hungry ghosts. Yeah, there's animals. Yeah, there's humans. Yeah, there's angry gods. Yeah, there's the heavenly realm. Okay. I read a translation of this. What I read is a very literal translation, above and below the heavens I alone am the honored one, from the Chinese, a literal translation from the Chinese. I was reading on a website, sometimes I get so frustrated with my denomination, our denomination. I tried to pitch something that, to make it a little softer. Because that's a challenging thing, right? We're like, okay, so now the Buddha's the Holy One, and now we all just have to follow Buddha. Right? That's what it sounds like. And so they had the translation that was, the Buddha said, above and below the heavens, I, the earth, and all beings are one. It's like, oh, okay. Well, I think that's a meaning you could get from this, right? So they're kind of being a little creative, but they don't want to challenge people. I would prefer to challenge you. What does it mean for the Buddha to say that? Is he talking about himself as a person, as a being, as an individual? Yeah, I'm the one. Everything has to relate back to me. I alone am the Messiah. Only through me can you know God. Paraphrase Jesus, right? What's being said there? Is it just like you have to surrender? Well, if that's it, then I'm out, personally. That's not what I got in this game for, right? Was that kind of submission. So I know there has to be something else here. Right? So I invite you to look for it. What is the Buddha? Think of a baby. When you look in the eyes of a baby, does a baby ever tell you, I'm just one among many? Do you want to change my diaper now? That's cool. Or maybe a little milk. I'm good with that. But I know I'm one among many, so, you could take care of them and I'll just, give me a number or whatever. No, that's not what the baby does, right? Baby is very clear about the total significance of aliveness, right? Very clear. They're not abstracted at all, right? The total presence that's there. What is that about awakening? What is that about when we wake up? What is that about when you see something and you go, the truth of this life is apparent to me. In that moment, what do you experience? What do you know that you don't know other times? And then the question is, how are you going to take care of it? How are you going to wash it? How are you going to keep it clean? Or is it just going to turn into the same kind of, problematic adults that we have all found our way into being? Yeah? So these are the kind of questions that a legend like this can invite us into. Thinking about, what does it mean for the Buddha to enter the world? From where would the Buddha come? What does it mean to be birthed? What is gestation? What is it to the immediacy of declaring a place of honor? Now, if you spend time with legend like this, and you pay attention, and you return to the ritual again and again, you don't have to think so heavily about it, but just returning to it again and again, it starts to get in your bones. It starts to get in the way it is that you experience life. The blossoms start coming, and you feel like, oh, something needs washed. now these legends can teach you something. A certain kind of teaching can become possible other than an explanation. Just to give you, that's quite a tome, isn't it? Don't worry, they're very short. So this is called the Eihei Koroku, which is a record of teachings that Dogen Zenji, the founder of the school of Zen Buddhism in Japan, that he gave, that were recorded by his students and by him. And so most of the Dharma Hall discourses is what they're called, are quite short teachings. And in the traditional sense, what would have happened is he was the abbot, he would have come in with a staff, gong, 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 into the hall, and he would have sat up on the altar, spoke for a short period of time, and then come down from the altar and left. And that's where these teachings came from in the 1200s in Japan. And one of the things I love about this is you can see that is giving teachings about this ritual and about the mythology of Zen Buddhism. But he's giving these teachings to people who are steeped in this mythology and in the ritual. So he's using the mythology and the ritual that people are doing over and over again as a means to deliver very important and deep teachings, which can't be delivered through explanation. Explanation won't get you there. It has to be through some other avenue. So these stories and these practices are talked about in a way that can be very bewildering. But if you pay attention to it, there's a lot inside there. So let me just read. This is very, very short Dharma Hall discourse. And in this one, actually, he just mostly quotes Wanshi Zenji. When Zen Master Wanshi was abbot of Cheongtong in a Dharma Hall discourse upon bathing Buddha, he said, "This is the completely clear water of the emptiness of self-nature, the perfectly bright, pure wisdom body. Therefore, we do not need to wash the body. Right here, not a speck of dust exists. So he has become Buddha, overcome demons, reached the other shore, and departed the deluded riverbank. This Dada Baba," that's how a baby talks. This Dada Wawa. We'd be like, what would we say? What do we say in English? Goo Goo Gaga, thank you. This Goo Goo Gaga baby talk was at the beginning. Then this random crawling around became the cause for becoming a Buddha. On this occasion, Shakyamuni Buddha, do not get angry at our pouring foul water on your head. Why don't you invoke the power of Avalokitesvara Bodhisattva, and then naturally this will rebound to you, rebound to the originator. Benevolent people, what is it like just when the ladle for pouring water over the Buddha is in your hand? Without the cause of thoroughly studying a single thing, we cannot develop any wisdom. The teacher Dogen said, "This ancient Buddha, my Dharma uncle, was from the branch of Furong and a disciple of Dansha. Although Wanshi said it like this, his descendant Eihei has a verse on this occasion." So Dogen's referring to himself. He says, I have a verse on this occasion. "At the time of his birth, 3,000 worlds trembled. At his awakening sight, 80,000 gates opened wide. Pouring water over the head of his unstained body is an embarrassing scene of sincerity in play." So there's a lot in this. I mean, if you didn't understand anything I just said, you were just like, I understood the words, but I don't get why anyone would say any of those things. You're in good company. That's not a strange reaction to this. But the reason I'm reading it to you is because I want to show that as you pay attention to these stories and to these practices carefully, that there is something that emerges. Listen to this. We do not need to wash the body. Right here, not a speck of dust exists. What are we doing washing this Buddha? What is meditation? Is it washing a Buddha? Are we trying to clean our mind? when we know our mind is Buddha itself? With what could we clean it? That's why he calls it foul water. He says, forgive us for pouring foul water on your head. Right? What water could you use to clean a Buddha? It will have to be cleaner than a Buddha, right? Isn't that what cleaning is you have to use something cleaner, to wash off the thing that's dirty? So what could it be? The split of our being, where we think that the Buddha is something that can be cared for in that kind of dualistic way, that awakening something that we could cling to and we could separate out from all the muddiness of life, right? Wanshi Zenji is messing with us here, but he can only mess with us if we know the story. Right? And that is at least one of the reasons why it's worth it to pay attention to these stories, so that you can be part of a lexicon of approach that ultimately is limited, but has the capacity to take the seventh step, right? Has the capacity to walk one more step beyond the clinging, beyond the notch in the boat. I trust it to be so. We probably have time for just one or two questions if anyone has anything burning.
Ejo?
Hi.
I'm wondering in the legend if there are any versions that have Mahamaya saying anything.
Saying anything?
Mm-hmm.
At the birth?
Yeah, are there any words that are attributed to her?
Not that I know of in that birth scene. It's all the ones that I have read are her actions. They're not her speaking. There are parts in the legend with like talking with her husband and taking leave and going back to her parents' house. In those parts, they're speaking, but not right in the center part of the birth scene that I know of. Yeah.
What's always struck me, rather than a lot of the stuff you're reading, was that Buddha was born under trees. He got enlightened under trees, and he died under trees.
Mm-hmm.
And so trees become the natural, the natural life.
Yeah.
Is so important.
Yeah. That's the Mahamaya grabbing the branch of the tree is really central to the imagery of the Buddha's birth. So if you see any artwork in Asia that's about the Buddha's birth, that's like the core. This is a very core part of the image is her grabbing the tree. And then, of course, all this, the Buddha's awakening and the offerings made to him, thinking that he was a tree spirit, right? And his awakening there, and then his death between the salt trees. So yeah, it's something in that really important. Right?
So the water is pure. The water is not foul, and it's pure unto pure. There's nothing to clean and nothing to polish.
What are we doing gathering together and sitting upright?
Living our lives, enacting,
We cause
appreciating the luminosity, experiencing the luminosity.
For me, a question there is, we seem to cause a lot of pain. Is that something that we just have to bear? Or is there something, some way beyond that?
Then maybe bathing pure with pure is taking refuge.
That sounds right to me. That's one of the reasons we continued. So like just after this Dharma Hall discourse, then in many of the end of the ones at the Buddha's birthday, Dogen says, okay, now let's go into the hall. Let's go into the Buddha hall and bathe the Buddha. So he'll say all these things and say, okay, now let's go into the hall and bathe the Buddha. Right? So it's a ritual.
Right.
Yeah. And in that last line of Dogen's verse, to me, in that whole Dharma hall discourse, his Dharma uncle Wanshi is playing with this, foul water. And then Dogen has this verse, and his last verse, he says, it's an embarrassing enactment of sincerity. Right? And I love that line. It's like the sincerity to do this thing, which is is so intimate. It cannot be caught in the world of trying to create an effect. The Buddha's purity calls out pure water. It's not that we need to wash something. That's like very challenging. That level of intimacy is embarrassing, It's like to be naked. So that's a place I go.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.